Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a Triad production. We hear a lot about the construct forgiveness. Most see it as a process of letting go of resentment, anger, or the desire for retribution towards someone who has caused us some kind of harm. It usually involves acknowledging a hurt, processing feelings, and making a choice to move forward, typically letting and working to let go of the negative emotions that we've accumulated because of that hurt. Most will say that forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean condoning the behavior or forgetting the incident done to you. Rather, it's about freeing yourself from the emotional burden and, if you're interested, potentially rebuilding trust or a relationship if you choose. Ultimately, forgiveness can lead to a personal sense of healing, personal well-being, emotional well-being. But how does this forgiveness process work? And what might it involve as one works to hold their experience in a new way? I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor, and joining me today to discuss this topic is Dara McKinley. Dara is a seasoned expert in spirituality and health with over 3 decades of experience. Dara's journey into forgiveness began after a personal challenge in 2012, leading her to develop a practical, structured approach to this often misunderstood concept. Her work clarifies the true nature of forgiveness, making it accessible and effective for those who find traditional ideas insufficient. Dara is passionate about offering a clear, logical path to forgiveness that can transform lives and bring lasting peace. We're excited to have Dara with us today to discuss her unique approach to forgiveness and her background and personal experiences that have shaped her methods. Dara, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
It is so nice to have you. So 2012 was a significant year for you. Help us understand the importance of that year and kind of what it shaped ever since.
Yeah, previous to 2012, I had been studying spirituality, alternative spirituality, and psychology for 2 decades, and even have a degree in Buddhism and psychology, and had a stint as a practicing psychotherapist. So I'm just always learning, always studying, an incredibly curious person. And so 2012 arrives, I'm 41 years old. And 3 years previous, I had lost my share of a business partnership that I had been in for probably, I think it was 7 years. I had a business idea. I teamed up with some business partners who ended up being incompatible, and the business took off. So we kind of endured each other for as long as we could. And then things fell apart and I lost my share of the business. And there was definitely like a cloud of deceit over how everything went down. So it was a very big loss for me. The stakes were low, in terms of like finances, but the emotional cost was big. So at this point, I'd had 2 years of psychology and spirituality behind me. And so I was like, okay, this is very difficult, but I have the skills to get through this. I know how to process my emotions. I know how to lean in on my significant relationships. I know how to focus on the good and have gratitude and recreate my life. And so this is 2009. So I did that for 3 years. And in 2012, I was still haunted by a negative narrative about what went down. And it really just felt intrusive. Like I would just be folding the laundry. And then all of a sudden I'd feel this like resentful narrative, going off in my head. So I wasn't over it. And during this time, I had a older, wise woman friend who kind of saw the whole thing happen. And every like 6 to 9 months, her and I would talk about it. And she would just let me say all the things that I wanted to say about it. And when I was done, she would say, Tara, you might want to consider forgiveness.
Oh.
And I remember, and I would get completely irritated by this suggestion. And in my mind, I would say, her name was Fran. I would say, Fran, like, didn't you just hear everything I just said? And, but anyway, so that happened like 2 or 3 times over that 3-year period. Anyway, 2012 comes and I find myself sliding into a mystery illness that's insomnia, anxiety, and fatigue. And I just want to say right now, because people hear that And we can swing back around to this if you want
Sure.
to. People hear that like I had an illness and then I found forgiveness, and they immediately equate that like forgiveness cured my illness, and it did not. And so I do have something to say about forgiveness and physical health. But with that said, this mystery illness is happening. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I just start getting extremely upset. The doctors can't diagnose it, and I start getting very concerned about my health. And so I'm a very spiritual person. I would never call myself psychic, but I would definitely say that I'm very intuitive. And I really went to like a rock bottom moment where I like implored the universe, like, please guide me out of this, and
Mm.
definitely and making deals. And I will do whatever you tell me to do. And the message I got back, and it was clear, super clear, was forgive Dara.
Mm.
And once again, just as if my friend Fran had been saying it to me, I was like, "Oh," like
Fran was right.
that cannot be the answer to my problems right now. But the message was so strong and so clear. I was like, "Okay, I can follow directions. I'll give this a shot. Let me get online and, find whoever has written like the 5-step how to for forgiveness, and I will follow it and see what happens." And so I get online and I type in how to forgive, and 99.99% of what comes up is why a person should forgive. And whenever I found like a couple of forums, I found people asking, "How? But how do you do it?" And the response would be, "You just do it."
Mm.
So I couldn't just do it. And so I thought, okay, I have, 20 years of spirituality and psychology behind me. Let me see if I can come up with my own step-by-step plan. And I began with asking myself the question, like, all right, I've had this like negative narrative floating through my head for 3 years now. Like, what is the opposite of that narrative? And upon asking myself that question is when I took my first step onto the path of forgiveness. And what I put together was a process that you do over a 3-week period. And 3 weeks later, I was at peace.
Wow.
My strong emotions were gone. I felt amazing. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in 3 years. And so, as a geek for healing modalities, which I was like, wow, this is for real. Like, this is incredible. And then my second thought was, and that wasn't pardoning. Why does everyone say forgiveness is pardoning?
Mm.
So I kind of just like was happy that I'd figured it out for myself and went on with my life. But as you can probably see, I'm someone who has meaningful conversations with pretty much everyone who crosses my path. And as I started talking to people over the years, I was like, wow, there's so many people who have something to forgive and they just lack a practical path. And then I also, really scrutinized the narratives that were in mainstream culture about forgiveness. And so here we have all these messages about forgiveness. And then I'm also watching, and who's actually able to forgive with these definitions. So that was, a decade-long study. Yeah. So that's
Wow, there's
my
there's so
story.
there's so many great things. I always appreciate stories and people being vulnerable in the show the way you're doing right now. And allows us, I think, to have a resonance with we all have something in our lives. Or we are around flawed people. We are flawed people, and injuries happen just because life happens. But there's so many cool things you're saying. One of them is you knew that there was something still being held on when that negative narrative would be playing when you're doing the most mundane things, laundry or dishes or whatever it could be, and there's something that's still being carried. And there's something about that experience where, when we go into business, it's all about trust, usually is when we're creating something, expanding something. And this theme of deceit, something in almost like a thematic piece that was still resonating with you, and a resentment around that being held in that negative narrative. This part two that I think is interesting is that we know that something is still being held when we still get triggered by it, don't we? There's something still alive in us from an injury maybe that we haven't let go of when we're doing the most mundane things, and it kind of sneaks into or intrudes or invades what we're doing. Well, as we're talking about this, Dar, you're talking about, this idea of forgiveness and pardoning and some of these words that we use. What are we talking about when we talk about forgiveness? Maybe define it as we get out of the gate here. What is
Well, So I have my own definition that I've come up with, but the mainstream definitions that we hear are pardoning, having compassion, ceasing anger, and letting go.
Mm,
And then, there's also like, being unconditionally loving to others.
hmm
We could throw that one in there. And what I came to discover when I went through that process was that those were actually potential outcomes of forgiveness. And
Very
so
nice.
I define forgiveness as it's a spiritual process that heals and repairs. And it has two main parts. And the first part is a person's ability to access and apply unconditional love.
Mm,
And the second part is to identify what needs it.
mm. These are kind of higher order, almost transcendent pieces here. Tell me a little bit more. So the part of it is it's a spiritual process that accesses an unconditional love for one. What was the second one?
And a person's ability to identify what needs that love.
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Are you preparing for a licensure exam in psychology, social work, marriage and family therapy, counseling, or behavioral analysis? AATBS is here to help. We have been supporting behavioral and mental health students to prepare for their licensure exams for more than 45 years, working with over 1 million students to succeed on test day and move on to the next step in their career. With products ranging from comprehensive courses to quiz banks and delivered live online, self-study online, and in print, AATBS has test prep solutions that meet every student's needs and learning styles. Visit us today at aatbs.com. That's aatbs.com and use promo code BHT15 to save 15% off your next purchase.
I'd love you to kind of mine down for us and expand a little bit around this. This is something far more than just and these are good things: ceasing anger, pardoning, unconditional, acceptance, etc., compassion. Those are all good. But you're talking about tapping into something even more transcendent. Take us down that path just a little bit.
From my earliest memories, I was a very spiritual person. And so I'm not going to say that I'm an unconditionally loving person because I'm not, but I have always felt unconditional love. Like,
Mm,
just, it's always been around me. So when I asked myself that question that night, what is the opposite of this negative narrative that I've been replaying and looping in for 3 years? My answer to that question was, oh, I could actually bless this situation for the highest love.
mm,
And because I have kind of lived life with a visceral experience of unconditional love, when I said, okay, Dara, you need to reach for the highest love, for me, it was right there. And so it was kind of this like easy thing for me to do.
mm.
And and so there are a lot of people like me who have a very felt sense of unconditional love, and it's essentially a very spiritual sense.
Mhm.
There's millions and billions of people like me, and there's people who it's not that vivid for. So what I like to say about it is that unconditional love is a spiritual love, and it's something that works through us and works for us. And for some people, they connect to it spiritually. For some people, they feel it through their families. For some people, they feel it through nature, some through their passions and creativity. And it's not passionate, it's not romance, it's not all the things it's not attachment. It's not so many things that we use the word love for in our culture. It's peaceful, it's soft, it opens our hearts. That's one of the main ways to know if it's working through you is your heart feels soft and open in a very peaceful and unattached way. It's very powerful. People who have had near-death experiences all report merging with this love. People who meditate, strong meditators. And next time I don't know if you are a strong meditator, but next time you come across a devoted meditator, you can just ask them, like, have you merged with unconditional love? And you'll, get into a cool conversation with them about it. And It's, one of the most acute places that it's in our everyday lives is around, babies. I say that babies, beam it and elicit it, and you can kind of say they just arrived here from, spiritually speaking, they just arrived here from somewhere else. And here they are, they come in and they're just these lighthouses, for unconditional love. And that's one of the places where I think it flows through in the strongest way. But it can be puppies and kittens and art. It really, there's so many ways for it to come through. So I have a lot more I could say about it, but I'll stop there.
It's a wonderful start. Well, there's a purity around that. It's almost like coming back home to the love that we have access to. There's something very grounding, something very central to this whole concept of love, and coming back home to that allows, like you're saying, really identifying what needs to be, receiving our unconditional love, and this process of being, you know, blessed by holding that unconditional love in the way you're saying, and you're holding up that this idea is a choice. It's a path that we do get to go down. We may not recognize. We might think more about the outcomes, like you said earlier, unconditional love. Starting kind of just with that whole concept, or the ceasing of anger, or pardoning, or compassion, trying to work towards compassion. But it's something much deeper. It's a returning and holding and centering oneself in love first. It sounds like then it kind of ripples over into these things you're describing very beautifully.
Right. And in a very practical way, like what I hope people can just see about it is that it's medicinal.
Mhm.
It's this thing that exists
Mhm.
that if we start to pay attention to how it's showing up in our lives, it's an actual free medicine.
Yeah.
That's right there that we can use.
Well, you even refer to it as a practical healing modality. It's this medicinal piece. What do folks struggle most with? You work with a lot of people, I know. You've been doing this for, over 3 decades. What is the struggle that most folks have, and the common obstacles that block one from considering or even being able to forgive in the, typical ways that people try and approach it?
So I think that if someone doesn't have a very strong sense of unconditional love, kind of wrapping one's head around that can be
Mm.
tricky because the world is conditional and our minds are conditional. So this is a very conditional existence. And so really grokking that there is something that fully embraces all of us and that is and has zero ability not to embrace all of us. Like it truly, like I kind of make a fun little joke that unconditional love doesn't care because it is
Mhm.
it has zero ability not to completely envelop and embrace us in love. And so that can be tricky for people in the beginning because again, our minds are very conditional, and we develop in the Western world, we develop the mind to be very logical. So I say to people that logic can actually be one of forgiveness's greatest obstacles because when someone has a huge rupture or betrayal in their lives, right? What comes in first? And this is, you can kind of say that this is one of the reasons I was looping for those 3 years, is that my logical mind was
Mhm.
trying to resolve this thing, this pain that I had inside my body about what happened 3 years previous. And so, this goes into, more of how I say that we're anatomically designed to forgive. And what I mean by that is that the left hemisphere of the brain is responsible for linear thinking and logic and, sequential thinking. And the right hemisphere of the brain is responsible for imagination, intuition, creativity, our spiritual connection. And it's
Mhm.
actually the right hemisphere of the brain that has all the skills for forgiveness. But Western culture is so trained to identify and use the left hemisphere of the brain that for people who are really, on that track,
Mhm.
to switch over and start using the right hemisphere of the brain and trusting that it has like this immense wisdom and capacity for healing and repair, that's a big jump for a lot of people.
Yeah, it really is. Also, too, the idea of forgiving for some would be, well, then I'm going to be vulnerable again to people. There's also an adaptive piece to, we might even say, to holding on to the grudge or holding on to the resentment because it protects you. But yeah, it really limits.
Right. No, it really limits us.
Yeah.
in
And
fact.
the fears if I let go, I'm going to be vulnerable again and I'm going to be taken advantage of. And
Yeah,
so,
you actually do way more damage to your being and to your relationships with that belief than if you kind of go in there and, clear it out.
what about this idea that, some people experience some really heinous events in their lives,
Right.
lines that get crossed just unimaginably. And they hear this word forgiveness and they probably think down the lines, like you're saying, of the typical thing, I got to let go. I've got to pardon. I'm going to condone it somehow if I do. Do you think
Right.
there are some things that are just unforgivable that just cross a line just too damagingly?
So first thing I want to say is that there are a good number of people who have survived atrocities and wars, and they actually swear that pardoning these, horrible, horrific events
Yeah.
freed them. And and they've written books about it. And I want to say that for these people, I believe them that pardoning was the answer for them. Because look, this pardoning definition has immense momentum and popularity. So it's definitely working for someone. And it's definitely working for a lot of people. My work is for the people that it doesn't work for. And that's
Yes.
a huge demographic right there as
Yes.
well. So I don't want to say that those people have it wrong. Like, my God, if you swear that pardoning helped you free yourself from some horrific event in the past, like, believe these people who say that. Okay, the people who say for something like horrific that's happened in the past, from the lens that I'm coming from, first of all, I actually do believe that some things are unpardonable and unexcusable. To me, it just doesn't make sense, like, why it doesn't add up for me, and again, I know I'm representing a huge group of people, that, like, how pardoning somebody would set me free. Though I do believe in accountability, in repair, I believe in making amends, like, that actually I do believe sets us free. So, for those people who say, like, "That was unexcusable, that was unpardonable, that was too much," I say to you, "Yeah, you know what? You are right." Where is that tragedy today? That tragedy today, right now in the present moment, is in a energy in your body and a narrative in your brain,
Mhm.
right? And so the question is, do you want to free yourself from that oppressive emotional burden? And you don't come out of that process condoning horrible things. You come out of that process as, a beacon for bringing greater healing and love to the world and having better relationships and having better health. There's a lots of, incredible side benefits. So, and then here's another piece is that I do think things are unpardonable and unexcusable. However, unconditional love really is unconditional.
Mhm.
Like, and so it's almost like sunshine. Whatever you put into sunshine, sunshine can't withhold itself from whatever is in front of it. So again, if we're looking at unconditional love as a medicine, we can put things in its path that would help dissolve, release, and soften.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the idea that is, you've used words like peaceful and softening and the opening of our hearts. That's such a transformative process for us. It's really a process that we get to involve ourselves in that leads us to something maybe that we never thought we could attain, or maybe we wouldn't have attained if this had not have, happened to us. Not that I want to bring bad things on so we can grow, but we can.
Yeah,
And that's
that's
what
one
you're
of
holding up.
yeah, it's one
Yeah.
of my favorite things about forgiveness is that how much creativity it releases.
Right. And if we don't, you're talking about I can't be creative if I'm holding that energy in my body and it's still present in my thoughts and in my mind. It occupies space, it rents time in our brain, and it takes us away from going and moving into things that we could really be contributing to and growing in new ways. This idea of this, I love this conversation. You talk about the infrastructure around forgiveness. What do you mean by that? And also this idea, forgiveness as a delegation. Talk about these two terms that you reference.
So, yeah, when I explain forgiveness as a delegation, so I say that Forgiveness is not our ability to be unconditionally loving, it's our ability to enlist unconditional love. And I'm not Christian, but I love to, in explaining that forgiveness is a delegation, kind of cite the most famous story about Jesus and forgiveness, which is when he's on the cross and he's being crucified and he's in his final moments, he's being tortured to death, and he looks up and says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And so many people cite this story because here he is in his final moments, walking his talk and forgiving and wanting to forgive the people who are torturing him to death, right? And
Right.
so what I love about that story is that he actually didn't forgive. He looked up and asked Father God to do it. He
Mm,
delegated.
mm,
And if I say, like, if we could have interviewed him in that moment, he might have said, "I'm in too much pain to do it
mm,
right now."
mm.
So when a rupture happens, it creates a lot of emotional upheaval. And so this is to me like one of the really beautiful practical things about forgiveness is that asking ourselves to be unconditionally loving and compassionate and to pardon when we have such a strong narrative about how wrong it was, what happened, or to just let go. I actually think like that's one of the one of the most difficult things for someone to hear when
Absolutely.
they're in the throes of a rupture. However, it's like, oh, but while I'm having this immense emotional upheaval, there's actually something outside of myself that I can access, that I can enlist, that could kind of help me during this difficult moment. And yeah, so I say that unconditional love is something that we're in relationship with. And so it's not us like all of a sudden becoming these like miraculously holy people
Mhm.
when we're in the aftermath of something very strong.
Love is really a verb in that way where you're talking about we're in relationship with it. And I love the story of Jesus on the cross because it accesses the two things you talked about very early on, that this is a spiritual process. One, it accesses unconditional love and it identifies who needs it most in his words.
Hmm.
Forgive them for they know not what they do. He's
Hmm.
identifying who needs it the most. So it's kind of really
Hmm.
cool how you're linking that in to
Hmm.
what you're doing is the two primary things that transcend the normal ideas of what forgiveness is. So
Hmm.
that's a nice kind of connection there, an analogy. Share with us how you take folks down this path of forgiveness. What do you do?
Well, the first thing I want them to do is to have an embodied experience of unconditional love. So I say to them, trillions of words have been spoken and written about unconditional love, but it's like actually feeling it and being able to use it is where the
Mm,
rubber meets the road. And so that's the first step is I teach people how to have an embodied experience of that. And then the second step is I teach them how to apply it. And so that's where I introduce them to the right hemisphere of the brain. And that the right hemisphere of the brain, though it's underdeveloped in Western society, is well equipped for forgiveness. And I teach them how to use the right hemisphere of the brain, which then applies the love to whatever it is they would like to forgive. We are Human beings are designed to heal and repair. And I'm not
absolutely.
saying that old age, sickness, and death isn't a reality also, because that's definitely a reality as well. But we weren't like sent to this planet to endure difficult things and then just become bitter and shriveled up and die. We actually have a anatomical repair system. And so the next thing I teach them is how to essentially like just move energy in a very straightforward way and how to tend to the somatic body. When someone has a negative narrative, a really strong negative narrative, from my perspective, what I see is there's something from the neck down that's
Yeah.
asking to be tended to that isn't getting the attention. So it's a somatic piece. Then the fourth and fifth thing I teach people to do is how to identify what it is about the situation and about themselves that specifically needs the unconditional love. And then once you are able to kind of make these plates spin together, forgiveness prevails.
Really good. What are some of you've had an extensive career doing this. What are some of the most rewarding experiences? Maybe pick one or two or a breakthrough you've seen and witnessed in someone's life who has been carrying something just so painful and what their forgiveness journey brings them to.
Yeah, I had, probably one of the strongest things that stands out to me is I had a woman who's was born to a mother with severe mental illness
Mm.
and had an incredibly difficult childhood because of it. And just, up until finding forgiveness and was a devoted healer as well. And, really tried was always dabbling, very curious, always, I think has her master's in psychology.
Mm.
And up until trying forgiveness, like nothing fully brought her to a deep sense of peace about, what people like me like to call her soul's curriculum in this life, right?
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. And and it wasn't easy at first to like, wow, I need to somehow bless this woman I need to, yeah, bless this woman who was never there for me in any maternal way, because of her, incredible mental illness in this life. It wasn't easy when she first stepped onto it, but she kept with it. And then once she started fully being able to do it, like, boom, the world opened up and she was able to make peace with it all.
I love that. What happens, just in a broad stroke way, what happens to the injury or injuries that someone experiences? They can't be undone, forgotten. They still exist because they happen in the past. But what happens to that injury that the person once upon a time carried in one way, and in some ways through the process of forgiveness that you're helping them walk through and actually see as attainable to them? What happens to that injury?
Well, it dissolves and the emotional burden dissolves and then it becomes wisdom
Hmm.
so that, we can carry forward and to be more skillful and more mature and, as I said, like bring greater love and well-being to whether it's our households or, to something bigger than that.
After people kind of reach this place with you and their journey's coming to an end, what what kind of feedback are they telling you in terms of, wow, I never thought I could reach this place, or who'd have thunk it, that something so heinous or something so boundary crossing, et cetera, I could actually walk through the world in a different way. What are you hearing back from them?
Yeah, I hear about a lot of creativity that gets released. I hear about just bitterness that's gone, that was, filtering into their lives, a greater sense of physical well-being, which, let me loop back to what brought me to this. So I had a health issue. So I just kind of want to say this like upfront. I had this health issue. And so forgiveness did not resolve my health issue. There was something else that was causing my health issue that would actually take me a very long time to figure out.
Mm.
However, as I see it at that time, it's like I couldn't have imagined figuring out that health issue with this negative
Yeah.
narrative hijacking me. So I like
Yeah.
to say that like forgiveness isn't going to like miraculously make your life all flowers and butterflies. It's going to give you a boat that has supplies and a life jacket. And it's
Yeah.
going to, as we all sail through the stormy sea
You
of
bet.
life, right? That's going to really support us and make sure that we are traversing the highest path, as we go through difficult times, because that's just life.
There's really both
Um,
sides to that, aren't there? One is I'm not carrying it in the same way anymore.
mhm.
And now that I can move to a place where it's dissolved and it becomes wisdom, I get something from this unexpectedly that allows me to journey in life in a brand new way that I most likely may not have attained in the way that I've got it now.
Right. And then just like on a side note, like people really love the fact that forgiveness finally makes sense and is practical. Because think about how huge the narrative is in mainstream world of pardoning and letting go and having compassion, ceasing anger. And again, it works for a lot of people, but there's so many people that it just doesn't add up for. And so they are walking through life feeling like, I'm not spiritual enough. I'm
Right.
not good, so to all of a sudden have it framed in a way that's like doable and logical and practical and is effective,
You
like
bet.
such a relief right there to be like, oh, there wasn't anything wrong with me. I just like needed a different approach with it.
Fantastic. Well, talking about this different approach and people learning about it, You've got an upcoming course that you're going to be teaching. This course, How to Forgive, is designed to guide people through the forgiveness process over a 6-week process. And you're
Right.
going to be walking them, just give us some of the main topic areas. So those that are listening today might even be able to follow up and be a part of this course. Give us some of the objectives of each of the weeks that you're going to be walking them through.
Yeah, so the objective is to have a practical experience of unconditional love and be able to access and apply it at will. To be able to use the right hemisphere of the brain, the left hemisphere is responsible for our experience with the external world, and the right hemisphere is responsible for our internal world. So I get people up and going with that. And then I teach them like how to identify what needs it. And that happens over a 3-week period. And it's very emotion positive. It's very somatic. Like I really want people at the end of the course to feel lighter in their bodies. Like to me, that's the win. If someone at the end of the 6 weeks can say, oh my goodness, this thing that I was slugging around with me for however long
Mm,
has been released, like
yeah,
that's what I'm after. In addition, I want people to walk off with this amazing skill that's going to benefit them for the
yeah.
rest of their lives and that's going to be in their back pocket and that they can use whenever they need to.
That's fantastic. Well, I would love for folks after the show, to follow up with you regarding this upcoming course and just in general. You got a great website. Give us some of the directions on how folks can get in touch with you after the show and follow up with the course as well. How can they get in touch with you?
So howtoforgive.com. How to forgive is what I typed in that fateful night on 2012. So that ended up becoming my
There you go.
domain. And right there, that you can read. It's a course information site, and so you can read about the course. And there's a sign up box where you can be notified for about the next course. Right. I offer it 3 times a year: once in the fall, once in the winter, and once in the spring. And yeah, I'm on Instagram, but I don't really do much there. And my main mode of people finding me is through lovely conversations like this. So I just really
Fantastic.
appreciate you having me.
Man, it's been great to have you today. What strikes me so beautifully here is that you're giving folks the ability, regardless of their circumstances, their histories, whatever it may be, to walk through their world in such a positive, creative, soft, I love that word, open-hearted way. The softness doesn't mean weakness or vulnerability. It means a vulnerable strength to be in the world in such an open way. So walking through the world in this positive, creative, soft, open-hearted way, what a gift to give to people. And we so appreciate you being with us today. Thanks for being on our show.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you for having me. And thank you for all the conversations that you're bringing to the world. Also, I think this podcast is wonderful and you have an amazing mission. Thank you.
We sure appreciate that. Thank you again.
Bye.
Also want to thank you, our listeners, for dropping by and joining Dara and me today. It's always great to have you with us. Regarding this episode today, I want to remind you that it and its resources and all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. Thanks again for being with us on the show, and we'll look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.